Well, all in all, it was a fairly civil, polite affair. There were no disasters from either leader, and I suppose we should explain the format of tonight, given that most viewers who've been tuning into your show haven't seen it. It was about an hour and 5 minutes. 100 undecided voters have been selected. They gathered in the Gabba. They were asked all sorts of questions from housing affordability, about a dozen topics all up, David. Housing affordability, nurses, anti-corruption commission, scare campaigns, electric vehicles and budget repair. Now, some of these subjects obviously many of them are going to be interpreted in different ways by both Anthony Albanese and Scott Morrison. Both were fairly assured in their presentations. They were friendly towards each other in the large. They called each other by their first name. Now, my impression was that there was no clear winner tonight. I think it's very early days, and hopefully we'll have at least a couple more of these things. But we have selected a couple of excerpts to play out. But Karen, what was your impression?
I thought it was interesting because it was very conversational, as you said, Andrew, very polite. I think the first name thing was deliberate on the part of Anthony Albanese because it elevates him to the same level as the Prime Minister. If he's not referring to him as Prime Minister but calling him Scott, then they puts him on even keel. And similarly, the Prime Minister was quoting a lot of facts and figures to indicate that he was kind of in charge, in control, knew what he was talking about. So there were little techniques being used, debate techniques, if you like. Each of them had a good moment. I thought the Prime Minister's probably strongest moment was when he confronted Anthony Albanese about his past policy on boat turnbacks and was trying to catch him on the hop a bit, and did, which Mr Albanese had to sort of clean up later. And probably Mr Albanese's strongest moment was when he talked about his vision for the future and talked about not being left behind, and you need to shape the future, not let the future shape you, and implying that the government wasn't doing enough to think ahead. So I think each of them had a moment. I think Anthony Albanese, for the fact that he did hold his own and probably didn't stumble in the way that he had last week, probably comes out looking slightly better, but only because, as one of the Sky News presenters said early on, he didn't fall over. If you don't fall over as opposition leader, then you'll count that as a win.
That's right, Karen. It's a bit of a high-wire act. This is the sort of occasion where avoiding disaster is your number one priority. But look, there was a bit of a stumble from Anthony Albanese. He got himself into a bit of a tangle when it came to border protection and boats, as Karen was indicating. Let's hear this excerpt. It is quite revealing.
You were Deputy Prime Minister. Why didn't you support turnbacks then?
You weren't proposing then.
No,
you were not proposing.
Well, I'm sorry,
you were
it was our policy.
You were not
Turnbacks were our policy before the 2013 election. I was the Shadow Immigration Minister. I designed the policy. So you were on the National Security Committee, I think for the first time at that time. And so why did you not support turnbacks?
I was on the National Security Committee. We had established offshore processing just in 2013, when I became Deputy Prime Minister. That was the first step.
So you were going to do turnbacks?
No, that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
I just wanted to be clear.
But why is it, Scott, that you're always looking for a division, not looking for
No,
an
I'm just
agreement?
looking for the accuracy and the truth.
Now, that's significant because it's on boat turnbacks and border protection. And, of course, Anthony Albanese fumbled last week. He was asked about offshore detention last week. He was a bit unclear as to what Labor's position had been. In that exchange, you could hear that he suggested that Labor was supportive of boat turnbacks, but in 2013 it was the Abbott-led opposition that supported boat turnbacks. Now, as Karen, you were saying earlier, he did try and clean up some of that a bit later in the piece, saying that a good idea should be embraced, and he said that boat turnbacks was a good idea.
He did indeed. That's right. He said that you're right. Towards the end of the debate, you're right. Scott, we did, we didn't support them initially. It was a good idea. We embraced it, and that fits with this theme that we're going to be cooperative when it's constructive, and we're going to push back on things that we think are bad. That was one of his themes of the evening.
Now, I think one of the other highlights, David, I know you want to bring in Steph Boris at some point, but there was a question on the NDIS from Catherine about her 4-year-old disabled son, Ethan. Now, it became a question of, a very personal question from Catherine about the fact that that her son had his funding stripped by about 30% with little or no warning. Now, that question on the NDIS became a subject of some discussion about the economy. Perhaps we can hear that one before we go any further.
Anthony's right. It's a great reform. As I said, I acknowledge the work of Bill as well as Julia. It is often Labor. They started Medicare as well. But it's always the Liberals and Nationals have to work out how to pay for these things. And that's what we've done over the last 8 years. Now, I make this point very importantly because I said at the start that this election is really about the economy. And if you don't have a strong economy, then programs like the National Disability Insurance Scheme, just like the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme when Labor were in power last time, they couldn't list medicines because they couldn't manage money. And so one of the most important things I can do to ensure that the National Disability Insurance Scheme is fully funded is we continue to run a strong economy, manage our finances well, keep our AAA credit rating. We're one of only 9 countries in the world who have done that through the pandemic.
Well, I've got to jump in there. Because it isn't just the NDIS, it is also the PBS was another Labor initiative. Labor does the big things, And we also do the big reforms. And what the Prime Minister has attempted to say there is we have an issue paying for things. Well, if you look at the big economic reforms, we just went through 3 decades of consecutive economic growth because of the Hawke-Keating reforms that happened. We then went through the global financial crisis better than just about any economy in the world because of the actions of the Rudd and Gillard government. And while we were doing it, we did the NDIS, we did paid parental leave, we did a fibre-based national broadband network. Labor does the big reforms.
Anthony Albanese there and Scott Morrison. Let's bring in political reporter Stephanie Boris. She's in Brisbane for the debate and joins us now. Steph, did you get a sense of how people in the room, the undecided voters, actually rated the 2 leaders?
Good evening, David. Well, it was pretty cordial and subdued, the audience there. We didn't hear any clapping or booing when the leaders were answering the questions tonight. As Andrew was saying, 100 undecided voters. But what's always interesting to watch is once the cameras are turned off and once that broadcast ended. We then saw the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, start to mingle with some of those voters, and he got a couple of photos. Likewise with the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. What he did first was actually go up to Catherine, who Andrew was just talking about previously. Catherine being the mother of that 4-year-old son, her 4-year-old son Ethan, who has autism, and she was explaining that her funding was cut. And in Mr Morrison's response, he said that, he'd get his team to follow up. He went over personally afterwards with a notebook and pen, and you could see him writing down details and having a chat with her. And then he further went on to take photos with voters too. Now, as some of these voters started to leave tonight here at the Gabba, we did ask them what they thought about tonight's debate and whether it's helped them decide who they'll vote for on May 21.
I thought they both spoke very well, but at the end of the day, it's the same BS that they both give. Didn't really give a future plan, just a lot of jargon.
Did you think any one of them performed better than the other? No.
I thought Scott Morrison was very clear on the answers in that he showed that he had a very good understanding of all the issues and had a plan for what they've been doing now.
I think Anthony did a better job than Scott, personally. I think Scott does know his stuff, but he comes across incredibly scripted, and whereas Anthony is able to give a bit more of a personal, off-the-cuff response to things.
I think there was a lot said, and a lot of talk and nothing said.
Some of the undecided voters in the audience at tonight's People's Forums. Steph, just before you go, what's next for the 2 leaders?
Yeah, great question. We never know, David. They never tell us anything. So both leaders are obviously here in Brisbane. Tomorrow we can, I would say, expect the Prime Minister to spend some time here in Queensland. It's the first time actually the Prime Minister has been in Queensland this election campaign. He's nearly visited everywhere now across Australia already. We've done Tasmania, Victoria, WA, South Australia. Obviously we started in the ACT, now we're in Queensland. So Northern Territory is the only one left to go. He's setting a cracking pace, and we do know that the Prime Minister is a very strong campaigner. You can see that he's really in his element with doing these various pick facts. He knows where the cameras are, he knows where the photographers are, he knows what they want, and he holds his own very strongly in those press conferences too. As for the opposition leader Anthony Albanese, he's been in Brisbane for a number of days now, a different style of campaigning, given that usually in election campaigns we see leaders move around sort of every 2 days or so, but he's been here for a number of days. He will move on tomorrow, but your guess is as good as mine, David.
Yeah, indeed. The Magical Mystery Tour continues. Stephanie Boris, thank you. Let's go back to ABC political editor Andrew Probyn and the Saturday paper's chief political correspondent Karen Middleton for some final thoughts. Perhaps to you first, Andrew.
Look, I don't think this is going to be a night that decides anything. These nights, especially the first debate of a campaign, is one where you don't want to self-implode. You don't want to be stepping on any policy landmines. Both leaders managed to avoid that. Both were relatively confident in their messaging. There was an interesting moment where the news of the day came up. In fact, I don't think we have time to show or play the excerpt when a question was raised by Kieran Gilbert, the host, about what's happened in Solomons, asking whether this was a massive policy failure. The Prime Minister turned on Anthony Albanese and said, when something as significant like this happens, why take China's side? To which Anthony Albanese said this was an outrageous slur by the Prime Minister. So that's going to be a debate that continues into the next few days. But my closing thought is let's hope we have a couple more and on free-to-air where more people can see it.
Karen?
It was a bit like a practice run for them, I think, in that the point Andrew makes there is a good one, that this was on paid TV. You could watch it if you had access to regional Sky News on free-to-air, but a lot of people couldn't see it. So it's almost like both these leaders were using this as a sort of a warm-up act for the rest of the campaign, and we'll see how it goes into the rest of the campaign. But it certainly was a confidence booster probably for both of them, and I'd say that Anthony Albanese maybe needed it more than the Prime Minister did because of his stumbles of last week. So he would come away happy with that, and I think Scott Morrison would also say he was pretty happy with how he performed. Did we learn anything new? I'm not sure about that. We've still got 4 weeks to go.
Yeah, and Karen, do you agree with Andrew that it's unlikely to change any votes here?
Well, it doesn't sound like it did much, does it? You know, it'll be interesting to see what the wider reaction is to that, but it didn't sound as though anyone heard anything much new that they didn't already know. And maybe, maybe that's not where the votes are going to change. It's going to be out on the hustings, meeting people, or on the airwaves and in the pages of the newspapers.
Yeah, it always seems to be with these debates that if it's smooth sailing, it doesn't really have much of an impact on the campaign. But if, as Andrew mentioned, if someone falls off that high wire, then it can actually make a big dent in the election. But doesn't look like that happened tonight. We will stay tuned to see if there's any further debates. Karen Middleton from the Saturday paper, Andrew Probyn, our chief political editor. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks, David.
And that is the program for tonight. I'm David Lipson. It's been great to have your company. There will be more election coverage throughout the evening and, of course, all through the next 4 weeks here on the ABC News Channel. Bye for now.